ruling over yourself, now that, perhaps, is the greatest form of power. Many philosophers have debated the meaning of mastery. Some say it lies in commanding armies, others say it's in influencing minds. But Søren Kierkegaard, the melancholic Danish philosopher, had a different answer. To master oneself, one must embrace the absurd. It may sound contradictory. How can surrendering to the absurd help you take control? But Kierkegaard believed that our attempts to force certainty onto a chaotic world were exactly what kept us trapped. To live authentically, he argued, we must first accept the void. Then, and only then, can we leap over it. This isn't just abstract thought. It's a guide, a quiet revolution. And it begins, oddly enough, with doubt. The courage to be uncertain. From childhood, we're trained to seek answers. What do you want to be when you grow up? What's your 5-year plan? What's your stance? Left or right, this or that? We cling to labels because they give us the illusion of clarity. But Kierkegaard warned that this is precisely what suffocates the individual soul. To grow, he argued, you must become lost, truly, terrifyingly lost. This is where he introduces the concept of the knight of faith. This person doesn't follow society's script. They don't pretend to know all the answers. They walk into uncertainty and still move forward with grace. It's not weakness. It's radical strength. The leap of faith. Not what you think. You've probably heard the phrase leap of faith. But forget everything Hollywood told you about it. For Kierkegaard, this wasn't about trusting a happy ending. It was about accepting that there might never be one. The world might make no sense at all. And yet, we must still choose to live, love, and act meaningfully. The leap isn't into certainty. It's into authenticity. Imagine someone walking a tightrope over a canyon. No net, no crowd, no applause. Just silence and the wind. This is the kind of faith Kierkegaard admired. Not blind belief, but brave engagement with life's absurdity. Now here's where Kierkegaard and someone like Lao Tzu might shake hands. In a noisy world, silence is power. Kierkegaard believed that truth is often so personal, so delicate, that to shout it out loud would be to distort it. He once said, "The crowd is untruth. The masses don't seek truth, they seek confirmation. But the individual, when silent, begins to hear something deeper, the inner voice that has long been drowned out." Think about it. Have you ever pretended not to know something in a conversation just to observe more clearly? You weren't playing dumb, you were listening with intent. In philosophy, as in life, sometimes the wisest move is not to speak, but to wait. Here's a paradox. When you express certainty, people resist. But when you admit doubt, they lean in. Kierkegaard practiced this disarming method in his writings. He often wrote under pseudonyms, each with a different viewpoint, not to confuse, but to invite reflection. Rather than preach from a pulpit, he walked beside the reader. He offered questions, not commandments. In this way, he subverted authority. He didn't need to dominate a room. He let ideas do the heavy lifting. And in doing so, he ruled in silence. At some point, everyone confronts a moment that makes no sense. A betrayal, a loss, a crisis. The world feels absurd, unfair, chaotic. Albert Camus, heavily inspired by Kierkegaard, called this the absurd condition, where we seek meaning, but the universe remains mute. Most people run from this confrontation. They drown it out with distraction or surrender to despair. But Kierkegaard said, stand still, face it, let it change you. That's how transformation begins. When you stop demanding that life explain itself and start responding with intention, that is the birth of true freedom. Subtle influence, leading without force. You've probably known someone who never commands attention, yet always seems to guide the room. They don't raise their voice. They raise the level of thought. That's Kierkegaard's kind of leadership, not through dominance, but through depth. He once wrote, "A man who, as a physical being, is always turned toward the outside, thinking that his happiness lies outside him, finally turns inward and discovers that the source is within." You don't need to control others to influence them. You simply need to understand yourself and live it boldly. The trap of appearances. Kierkegaard despised pretense. He lived in 19th century Denmark, where everyone went to church, dressed respectably, and said all the right things. But inside, many were hollow. So he mocked it relentlessly. He challenged the rituals, the posturing, the illusions of depth. Because truth, he believed, is not found in how you look, but in how you live. So why pretend to be wise when you can be honest? Why posture when you can reflect? Letting others find the answer. Here's a brilliant irony. When you try to force someone to see the truth, they resist. But if you give them room, they often arrive there on their own. Kierkegaard didn't want followers. He wanted people to wake up. He believed that real insight must come from within. It can't be implanted. So when someone you care about is lost, maybe don't preach. Maybe ask a better question. Plant a seed. Then step back. The final paradox. To rule is to serve. What does it mean to rule? If you believe Kierkegaard, it isn't about control or conquest. It's about serving a higher truth, even when no one understands. It's about wrestling with doubt and still showing up. About leading not through charisma, but through quiet conviction. He once said, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." And in that contradiction lies the human condition. You won't always know what you're doing, but that's okay. Because the leap, the real one, is not into certainty. It's into sincerity. So play the fool if you must. Stay silent. Doubt yourself. Let others speak first. But do so not because you're weak, but because you're wise enough to wait. And in the waiting, you just might find yourself. The hidden power of restraint. There's a story, possibly apocryphal, that Kierkegaard once fell in love. She was young, brilliant, full of life. But instead of marrying her, he broke things off. Not because he didn't care, but because he believed his inner struggle would poison her joy. He chose restraint and solitude. To many, this seems tragic. But for Kierkegaard, it was honest. Real strength, he believed, sometimes lies in not taking what you want, in recognizing your shadow and refusing to let it fall on someone else. Existence before explanation. This was the core of Kierkegaard's existentialism before it had a name. You exist first, then you define who you are. He shattered the old philosophical tradition that said essence precedes existence, that you are born with a purpose, a clear role, a fixed identity. Number, he said, you're born, and then you must become. Become what, exactly? That's the terrifying part. There is no template, no instruction manual, only choices. Each choice you make is a brushstroke. Together, they paint the person you are, the despair of not choosing. But what if you choose nothing? What if you wait forever, hoping someone else will decide for you? That's what Kierkegaard called despair. Despair isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like comfort, like a job you don't love, a relationship you don't leave, a version of yourself you no longer believe in. He warned that this kind of despair was far more dangerous than obvious suffering because it slowly numbs the soul until one day you wake up and you're not even sure who's looking back in the mirror. The mask and the mirror. Most of us wear masks online, at work, even with friends. We become fluent in personas, clever, filtered versions of ourselves. But behind the performance is someone waiting to be seen. Kierkegaard called this the self in relation to itself. He believed that your true self isn't a thing you find once. It's a relationship, something you continually build through reflection, honesty, and risk. And that building, it can't happen if you're always performing. Sometimes you have to take off the mask and sit with your own silence, even if no one else claps. The enemy of authenticity: comparison. In today's world, we compare constantly: followers, careers, partners, lifestyles. But Kierkegaard saw this coming nearly 200 years ago. He wrote, "Once you label me, you negate me, because comparison steals something sacred, your individual truth. You can't live authentically while trying to win a game designed for someone else. When you try to keep up, you lose your why. And without your why, everything becomes hollow, no matter how shiny it looks on the outside." Wisdom in unfinished stories. Kierkegaard died young at 42. He was mocked in his time, dismissed as eccentric, and yet his words survived. Not because he gave us answers, but because he gave us questions worth living through. He left many works unfinished. But maybe that's the point. We're all unfinished stories. And that's okay. You don't need to have everything figured out. You just need to live with honest intention. The power of living backwards. Life can only be understood backwards, Kierkegaard wrote, but it must be lived forwards. What does that mean? It means that clarity often comes late. You won't always understand your decisions in the moment, but live truthfully. And someday, maybe years later, the pieces will start to fit. The confusion, the detours, the failures, they weren't wasted. They were the necessary texture of your becoming. What Kierkegaard would say to you today. If Søren Kierkegaard were alive now, maybe he wouldn't have a TikTok. Or maybe he'd post a single video. A man sitting alone in a room, thinking. He'd say, stop looking for mass approval. Start listening to your inner voice. He'd urge you to risk becoming unpopular in order to become whole. He'd remind you that it's better to be lonely in your truth than accepted in a lie, that the crowd will always ask for simpler answers. But life, real life, is not simple. It's beautiful, unbearable, absurd, and worth it. Embracing the quiet rebellion, there's something quietly rebellious about living authentically. Not loudly, not arrogantly, just waking up and choosing to be you, fully, honestly, without the mask. It's not about standing above others. It's about standing beside yourself without flinching. That's the Kierkegaardian revolution. It doesn't begin with a crowd. It begins with one person choosing courage over comfort. That person could be you. You're not late. You're just arriving. If you've been feeling behind, like everyone else has their life figured out, remember this. The ones who look most certain are often the most lost, and the ones who dare to doubt, they are usually the ones paying attention. Kierkegaard wasn't here to make you feel comfortable. He was here to wake you up. And if this moment feels uncomfortable, maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it means you're waking up too. Closing reflections, soft piano fades in. So next time you feel the urge to speak first, to pretend you know more than you do, or to chase what the world says is success, pause, ask, am I living honestly, or am I just trying to be seen? The greatest rule is not the one you place over others, but the one you place over your own ego. And the truest form of power may just be the courage to live without needing to win. In a world that rewards noise, be the quiet flame. Burn steadily, live deeply. And remember, it's okay not to have all the answers. That's where the journey begins. The courage to be ordinary. Modern life tells us to chase greatness, to stand out, be remembered, go viral. But Kierkegaard reminds us of something quieter. It takes more courage to be ordinary, to live without applause, to love without guarantee, to believe without proof. The world may never notice, but your soul will. To live with integrity in a dishonest age, that is a revolution all its own. You don't have to lead a movement. You just have to lead yourself, away from the noise and back toward your truth, becoming the author of your life. Every day, you're writing your story, not with grand declarations, but in small moments. How you speak, how you forgive, how you stay kind when it's hard. You're not a background character. You're the author. And yes, the plot may twist. People will misunderstand you. Sometimes you will misunderstand you. But if you can keep writing anyway, with honesty, with humility, then your life won't just be lived, it will be earned. You are already enough. Maybe the most radical thing you can believe today is this: you are already enough. Not when you hit a goal, not when others approve. Right now, as you are. Kierkegaard's deepest message wasn't about despair, it was about becoming whole. And becoming whole doesn't mean becoming perfect. It means accepting the cracks and finding the courage to keep going anyway. That's what faith really is. Not blind belief in some distant God, but faith in your ability to live honestly in spite of fear. Final words fade out with warmth. So if you're still searching for answers, for meaning, for yourself, don't worry. That search is the path. You're not lost. You're just becoming. And that is the most human thing of all. The most common form of despair is not being who you are. Søren Kierkegaard. You should play dumb, but not be ignorant. It's about knowing when to talk, and more importantly, when to listen. Plato put this beautifully. Wise men speak because they have something to say. Fools because they have to say something. By listening, you gather valuable information from everyone around you. Then, when the time comes to speak, you can offer the best idea because you haven't missed a single detail. By playing dumb, you're actually playing intelligently, letting them think they've solved their problems on their own. We are surrounded by individuals, parents, teachers, bosses, whom we should respect, often regardless of whether they are right or wrong. But respect doesn't mean blind agreement. It means guiding them subtly, planting ideas in ways that let them believe the thoughts were theirs all along. You've probably seen professional athletes allow a disabled fan to win after a bit of a struggle, making that person feel as though they truly triumphed on their own. It's not deception, it's compassion paired with wisdom. This same strategy applies in relationships, in teams, and even in negotiations. When people think they've solved their own problems, they gain confidence. You, meanwhile, remain the quiet architect in the background, and this, Schopenhauer believed, is the essence of influence. The mask of mediocrity. Many great thinkers have chosen to appear mediocre to avoid attracting unnecessary opposition. By blending in, they were free to work, observe, and strike at the right moment. Even Socrates, one of the greatest minds in Western philosophy, played dumb. He asked questions he already knew the answers to, not to prove others wrong, but to lead them to truth. This technique became known as the Socratic method, and it remains one of the most powerful tools of learning and persuasion. To ask questions that seem simple. To admit ignorance even when you know the answer. This invites people in. It disarms egos. And it allows you to reach places no lecture ever could. When you pretend to be less than you are, people don't see you as a threat. They open up, they talk. And that's when the real work begins. Empty vessels make the most noise. In every room, there will be someone who dominates the conversation. They seem confident. They always have a story, a strong opinion, or a clever answer. But Schopenhauer and later thinkers like Nietzsche and even Alan Watts warned us. Just because someone speaks the most doesn't mean they know the most. An empty vessel makes the most noise, and a quiet person often sees the most clearly. There's a reason why masters in martial arts, philosophy, and strategy often live simply and speak softly. They've learned that depth doesn't shout, it whispers, and when it speaks, people listen. Power without presence. True power doesn't always wear a crown. It doesn't always raise its voice. In fact, it often avoids the spotlight altogether. The ancient Taoist sage Lao Tzu said, "When the best leader's work is done, the people say, 'We did it ourselves.'" This is the paradox of true strength. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't announce itself. Instead, it works silently in the background, shaping, guiding, and influencing. Not by force, but by quiet confidence. Not through dominance, but through understanding. This is what Schopenhauer meant when he spoke of the wisdom of appearing less. To appear simple is not to be simple. To appear slow is not to be slow. It is, in fact, to choose your battles carefully. To know your value, but let others underestimate it. Because when the time comes, you won't need to prove anything. You'll simply act, and everyone will understand. The courage to be ordinary. Modern life tells us to chase greatness, to stand out, be remembered, go viral. But Kierkegaard reminds us of something quieter. It takes more courage to be ordinary, to live without applause, to love without guarantee, to believe without proof. The world may never notice, but your soul will. To live with integrity in a dishonest age, that is a revolution all its own. You don't have to lead a movement. You just have to lead yourself, away from the noise and back toward your truth, becoming the author of your life. Every day you're writing your story, not with grand declarations, but in small moments. How you speak, how you forgive, how you stay kind when it's hard. You're not a background character. You're the author. And yes, the plot may twist. People will misunderstand you. Sometimes you will misunderstand you. But if you can keep writing anyway, with honesty, with humility, then your life won't just be lived. It will be earned. You are